Hello everyone. Welcome to the Jakarta Content Week. Today we will be talking about addressing climate and global crisis with green innovation and IP strategy. Human activities are the main driving force behind climate change. The struggle to slow the rate of global warming requires us to re-examine our lifestyle and economy. A new initiative, WIPO Green, is a hub for parties with environmentally friendly products, production models, and technology. The platform is also part of the massive campaign that we can continue to live and produce in better ways. Today, we are honored to have the guest, the director of Global Challenge Division at the World Intellectual Property Organization, also known as WIPO, Marian Amy Dietrich. Dietrich? Is that correct?
Yes, Dietrich.
I would call you Amy from now on to make sure that I don't mix up your name. So in
Sure.
this role, she covers intellectual property or IP related global policy issues in the areas of global health, climate change, and food security. Amy has 20 years of experience in the field of public health, water and sanitation, and governance, spanning community-based organization, international NGOs, global health partnership, and now United Nations institution. Prior to joining WIPO in 2018, she worked with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Society to ensure stronger community engagement in health system governance and service delivery, and with the Parliamentary Network of World Bank and IMF to support parliamentary oversight of development cooperation and financing. Amy earned her academic qualifications in public health, biology, and French from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, as well as Bucknell University. You have a very impressive background and experience, and I'm sure you have a lot to share with us today. Very nice meeting you, Amy.
Thank you, Farwiza. And it's a real pleasure to be joining you for Jack Tent.
I would like to invite you to share with us about your work and about the initiatives that you are leading with WIPO.
Absolutely, it'd be a pleasure. I did prepare a few slides, so if you could put those up on the screen, I think that would help everyone to follow along. So today I'm going to speak about IP as a tool to address climate challenges. And now I'm going to move to the second slide, which presents a bit of an outline of my points. So first, I'd like to review the broad context, the global remit for acting to mitigate and to prevent further climate change and to help humanity adapt to that. Then I'm going to speak a little bit about intellectual property, the World Intellectual Property Organization, innovation, and the importance of interlinkages. Then I'll speak a little bit specifically about IP and green technology because we see some interesting and unique trends here at the intersection of IP and green technology. And then finally, I will present WIPO Green, which is WIPO's initiative to use intellectual property and innovation to help address the challenges of climate change. So I'm going to go now to my third slide, which has the Sustainable Development Goals on there, all 17 of them. And this is just to remind you that this is the context in which WIPO and all UN specialized agencies are working. We all work to contribute to support the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at this slide, you see that more than half of them have some element of addressing climate change and addressing the environment. So clearly, we are not going to meet these goals unless we really put the pedal to the metal, to use an American expression, on stopping climate change, on adapting to climate change. Obviously, we can't completely stop it because it's not entirely within our control, but we do know that human actions are aggravating climate change and that we're going to have to address those if we want to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. So now I'll move to the next slide, which for me is slide 4, and where you'll see a title at the top that says Main Characteristics. And this is actually another way of looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and mapping them for all of their crossovers. And generally, the characteristics that we see of the Sustainable Development Goals is that they are truly universal, they are integrated, they are indivisible. You can't just choose to achieve one because one will touch on many others. And that there's a balance to the 3 dimensions. 3 dimensions, when I speak about that, because from my division, we're handling global health, climate change, and food security. So from when I say the 3 dimensions, that's what I'm speaking about. And we see that those are especially totally interlinked. You can't address health without addressing climate change and food security. You can't address climate change and food security without addressing health, and on and on and on. And if we look at the intersection of the 17 goals, we see that the words that crop up most often in the areas that we really need to target to address are resource efficiency, green infrastructure, green energy, green transport, resilience, water. So this is just another way of presenting visually the SDGs. Now, if we go to the next slide, I know that the print is too small for you to see, but what's important here is to see the trends. So I'll walk you through that. So what this is the global risk landscape, which is done every year by the World Economic Forum, and they survey top business leaders. And they've been doing this since 2007. So you'll see there's 2 distinct sets of rectangles. The one on the top of your screen is called the top global risks in terms of likelihood. And the one at the bottom of the slide is the top global risks in terms of impact. So the top set of rectangles is how likely are we to face this set of risks? And the bottom set of rectangles is, and if we face them, how serious would this be? So what you're seeing towards the left hand of the slide is 2007. So in 2007, global business leaders were predicting, and at the bottom is the legend. So every rectangle that's blue is an economic risk. Every rectangle that's green is an environmental risk. Every rectangle that's orange is a geopolitical risk. Red is societal, and purple is technological. So as you can see, in 2007, global business leaders were predicting the biggest risks in terms of likelihood would be economic, technological, and then there's one for societal. And so in there, they're including chronic diseases, oil price shock, blow up in asset prices, and infrastructure breakdown. And then if you go in terms of impact, in 2007, global business leaders were predicting deglobalization, interstate and civil wars, pandemics, and oil price shock as the biggest risks that would have an impact. So if you move to the right, you get closer and closer to 2020. And the strip of rectangles on your right is 2020. And what do you see there? You see that global business leaders are now recognizing that almost every single major risk in terms of likelihood and impact that the world is facing is environmental related. And if I read out the risks for 2020, it's extreme weather, climate action failure, natural disasters, biodiversity loss, human-made environmental disaster. There's one in geopolitical, which is weapons of mass destruction, and then there's one in societal, which is water crisis, which is still environmental. So what we're seeing is that there has been a shift over the past approximately 13 years away from the blue squares and towards the green squares. Now, interestingly enough, the last time that global pandemic was identified by world business leaders as a potential risk was back in 2007 and 2008. So clearly they kind of missed the mark a little bit, but other than that, of course, 2020 has been the year of COVID-19, but 2020 has also been the year of a global reckoning that COVID-19 is just dress rehearsal for the major global crisis, which is climate change. So those are my scene setting slides. I will now move on to introduce you to WIPO. So now I'm on slide 6. So WIPO is the World Intellectual Property Organization, and we are the UN specialized agency for innovation and creativity in the form of intellectual property for the economic, social, cultural development of all countries. So WIPO's aim is a balanced IP system where IP is working for countries all around the world. What we do is we lead multilateral efforts to create a balanced and effective global IP system. The entire goal of which is to support inventiveness and creativity, including the creativity that will be required to achieve the SDGs, because we really need to have a lot of new ideas, not only about how to develop new technologies, but how to get them out there into the hands of people who are looking for them and who are ready to use them. And there, I think governments play a major role, but I'll talk about that more later. And at the core of WIPO's mission is actually SDG 9, which is the goal that's all about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So we are headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. We have a total of about 1,700 staff, and we have what we call external offices. We have, I think, about 6 of them around the world. The closest one to Jakarta is actually over in Singapore. Okay, moving to slide 7, which is a little bit more specific about IP and sustainable development. So clearly, WIPO has a sustainable development remit because we are part of the United Nations system, so we have a duty to contribute to that. And the way that we interpret that is mainly through helping to support innovation. Now, interestingly enough, there is no specific reference to intellectual property in any of the sustainable development goals or indeed in any of the targets. Neither does IP have any indicator in the related indicator framework. So clearly, we as an agency are having to be creative and innovative about how we are supporting the sustainable development goals. And so far, we've really identified innovation as the key link between us and the Sustainable Development Goals. Which leads me to my next slide, which is slide 8, where I'm going to speak a little bit about the innovation knowledge spillover. So this is the idea of exponential innovation, the fact that once you start to innovate in an area, you're going to have more innovators that are going to build on that creativity and take us further faster. And this is a trend that we actually see going back years and years and years from the development of the very first combustion engine. So once you started to get the first innovations there, you started to see more and more companies innovating in that space and really leading to the exponential innovation. So this is good news because it obviously provides benefits to society. And interestingly enough, what we see with innovation is that often the social rates of return for research and development are higher than the private rates of return. And what that means, and I'll give you a specific example, in the area of vaccines, especially in the older vaccines, so not the super cutting edge one that is currently being developed for COVID-19, but most vaccines, which have been around for quite some time, their manufacturers, which are by and large mostly generic manufacturers now, actually make very, very little profit. And that's not really the reason that they're producing them. What we actually see is that even though the manufacturers are only able to charge a very small price per dose, the social benefit to having your population vaccinated, say, for example, against something like measles, is in the billions and billions and billions. And that's what we call a social rate of return. The small investment in vaccinating the population is leading to a huge rate of return that's actually much bigger than the monetary rate or the private rate of return that the manufacturer is receiving. And now I'd like to zoom in especially on low carbon technologies. So research suggests that the knowledge spillover, the incremental innovation in low carbon technologies is actually 60% higher than for high carbon kind of traditionally polluting technologies, which is good news. That means that every dollar that is invested in research and development in the green technology sector is creating more and more and more innovation spillover. So that means that the social rate of return in the green technology sector is actually going to be up to 60% higher than polluting industries. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about technology diffusion. So once that green technology has been developed, how do we get it out there? How do we get it into the hands of governments and people who are excited to use it and who are looking to abandon older polluting technologies and use green technologies in their place? What's kind of the way that we do that? Well, we've seen that intellectual property rights play a very key role because what they do, they provide essentially a safe space for those technologies to be transferred and to be diffused, because when you apply for intellectual property, and I'm thinking specifically now of patents, what you have to do is you have to disclose that invention. You have to make it publicly available. You have to put it down on paper. And in exchange for making it publicly available, you are given a certain amount of time of protection for that patent, which is usually about 20 years. So you start to create this framework, this safe space, where the innovators know that they will have the right, that they will have say over how their ideas are implemented and by whom. So they will be able to choose, for example, a reliable supplier and a known entity to really implement their ideas. So we see that intellectual property rights play a key role, not only patents, but also trademarks and brands, recognizing a recognized supplier, a recognized, people tend to go for products that they know. So that's the trademarks and brands aspect also. And then also copyright. So what I've just named three main dimensions of intellectual property that we see all of them play a role in the diffusion of green technologies. Trade and market aspects. So here you're getting into, are there tariff barriers? Are there non-tariff barriers? How friendly is the trade environment in the country to bringing in new technologies and then to further developing them on your own soil and also for export. What is the science, R&D, and adaptation capacity? And that's usually in the receiving country. So if you have a green technology that's developed, say, in Indonesia, and you have your neighbor Malaysia who's very interested in it, what is the absorptive capacity in Malaysia to receive that technology? Policy considerations, obviously that's huge, and that's mostly at the government level, and that really helps to set the context. And finally, public and private sector interactions. Okay, I'm going to go to slide 10 now, and I won't spend too much time on this, but this is just to show you, and this is a bit broader than the green technology space. We're widening out to the SDGs more broadly now, and this is to demonstrate how the phenomenon of exponential technological growth, which I described earlier, is really driving growth in a lot of the SDG-related sectors. So just quickly, in transportation, which is about SDG 9 and 11, we see exponential innovation in electric and autonomous vehicles, but not in internal combustion engines. So that's good news for the environment. In health, which is SDG 3, we see a lot of exponential technological growth in diagnostics, in the designing of compounds. Compounds are really the effective ingredients in any kind of drug you're going to take. In medical machines, in information sharing, and also in personal health monitoring, which is becoming a very big tool and a very important one as well. In resource management, which touches on SDGs 6, 7, 11, 14, and 16, in terms of satellite images, remote sensors, spectral imaging, and these are used a lot in agriculture. Increasingly, when you have very large agricultural operations, they're using satellite imagery to really monitor the quality of the crops and whether there's any pests that are cropping up. In energy, we see exponential innovation, especially in grid and energy storage and energy management. And that's SDGs 7, 10, and 13. And then finally, farming, which I touched on a little bit in the resource management area. We see exponential innovation in the use of biotechnology, robots, drones, remote sensing, irrigation, and hydroponics. Hydroponics is growing crops with as little water and actually sometimes even entirely outside of the soil. And so that relates to SDGs 2, 9, 11, 13, 14, and 15. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit specifically on my division at the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is the Global Challenges Division. And as I mentioned, my division spends their days working on the interface between IP and food security and climate change and health. Now, those are three extremely busy and important areas, and there are also three intensely interlinked areas. And as I mentioned before, you're not going to really be able to address one effectively without addressing the other two. So what this slide does is it just walks you through all of the links and all of the interrelations between the three areas. And I won't go into specifics here just because I think you can see the slide, but you know, the point here is basically that really everything is interrelated when it comes to the SDGs, but also when it comes to the biggest challenges facing humanity today, first and foremost being climate change, but of course not forgetting global health. This is some insight. I'm on slide 10 now. And the title is Green Tech PCT Patent Filings. And this, I just wanted to give you, so PCT is the Patent Cooperation Treaty. And what that is when an innovator would like to patent or to protect their innovation beyond their own national borders in multiple countries, what they do is they file with us. They file with WIPO and they say, I would like to protect this innovation in the following countries. So what that does is that gives us a tremendous amount of data and insight into the areas of technology that are growing the most and where. So that's what this slide is about. This slide is about filings in the area of green technology in 2019. And where were these filings requested? So you see that the US and China are in the darkest green color, which means that that's really where we saw the most activity last year in terms of green technology related filings in the Patent Cooperation Treaty. So basically, the darker green the area, the more filings we saw. So you can see that it's the US and China that's really leading. We also see Japan in dark green. We see Australia and India and Saudi Arabia and Brazil and Canada and Mexico and Russia. Also in a nice shade of green, and Germany. And then we also see Spain and France and Italy and the Nordic countries. So this is just to show you where we see the most activity in terms of new green technology innovation. My next slide, which is slide 13, I apologize, I know this is getting a bit granular. This is zooming in on green energy patent filings, and what we've seen is that there was actually a big increase in patent filings in the green technology area up to about 2013. And since then, rather disappointingly, generally, but it doesn't hold true for all of the areas, we've seen a bit of a slowdown. And so that's why I've circled solar here. So if you see in this column that is third from the right, total growth from 2013 to 2019, you see that innovation in solar has actually declined by 38% since 2013. Now the question is why? Is it already saturated? We don't really know. We suspect that it could be saturation. But the news is not all bad. We do see areas where there has continued to be growth since 2013. So one of them is heat pumps. So that's geothermal. So that's getting your heat from the ground, the natural heat that's in the ground and that's in the air, instead of, for example, burning coal, burning wood, burning fuel. We also see good news in the storage of electrical energy. So patents in that area have actually risen 23% since 2013. So we see a lot of activity there. And what that is that's trying to figure out new ways of storing electrical energy. So as we move to, for example, the electric cars, but also the solar grids and trying to store more long-term the energy that's produced there, you're going to see that innovation is specifically needed in the storage of electrical energy. So that's good news. And we also see that patents in hybrid cars have gone up, have actually gone down 50% since 2013. And again, that's actually not surprising because where we're seeing innovation now in hybrid cars is actually in the design of the battery and of the energy storage. So like I said before, we've seen growth there. This is my last slide on the insights into green energy innovation and accelerated growth up until about 2013 and then slow decline. And then fortunately, in some areas, we've again seen growth, and that would be, again, in transport, in thermal processes, and in electrical machinery are mostly the areas where we've seen an uptick, a renewed uptick following 2013. And as I said, we've actually seen it go down, the PCT filings, in the areas of alternative energy and pumps and turbines. So I will go to slide 15 now. This is just on food security, as I mentioned, very closely linked to climate change and touching on SDGs 1, 2, 3, 6, 14, and 15. So what are some patterns that we see here that the intellectual property landscape helps us to gain insights to? Well, we see there's particular interest in an area called climate smart agriculture. And this is, how do we increase agricultural yield while taking much better care of the soil, of the water supply, and of the environment in general? And a lot of the technology there is we're looking at zero-till agriculture. We are looking at stopping or significantly reducing the use of pesticides and insecticides in agriculture. Pardon, I'm getting over a cold. And so climate smart agriculture is a really good framework for addressing food security because it really brings to life the conceptual link between food security and climate change. And as I've said, the two of them are really inseparable. We are also looking at issues in food loss and food waste. So around the world, we see that a very significant portion of the world's food production is actually lost before it's even consumed. And unfortunately, an equally significant portion is actually wasted. It's never consumed. It's left to rot, which actually then further contributes to the emissions that lead to climate change, because as food decomposes, it releases various gases that are very harmful for the environment. So this is another technological and innovation area that WIPO is looking very closely. And then finally, WIPO Green. So this is the final part of my presentation. We have really focused our efforts to support the addressing of climate change and climate mitigation into WIPO Green. Now, what is WIPO Green? I'm on slide 16 here. So WIPO Green is essentially an online platform for green technology exchange. And our entire goal, so the world is currently transitioning to a greener global economy, away from what has been an extremely polluting, resource-intensive model of economic growth that we know simply cannot continue. So WIPO Green's main goal is to really speed up the transition from the polluting economy to a much greener global economy. We really want to help to speed this up. So how do we do that? So we connect those who have developed environmentally sustainable solutions with those who are looking for those solutions. And essentially, we offer a transparent marketplace for green technologies. We offer support to innovators, particularly those in the developing world. We engage very closely with the private sector because we know that approximately 80% of green technology innovation is coming from the private sector, including in large part small and medium-sized enterprises. And we are similarly, as a UN agency, we are contributing constructively to the global policy dialogue. So all at once, we are attempting to support those who are operational in the green technology space. And we're also ensuring that any important messages they might have are getting passed up to the global policymaking space. So now I'm on slide 17. This explains a little bit more about the WIPO Green business model and the platform model. So essentially, we liken ourselves to Airbnb and Uber because we don't own any assets, and neither do they. Airbnb does not own the apartments that they are advertising, and Uber does not own the cars in which they are providing the transport. And it's the same model for WIPO Green. We don't own these technologies. What we do is we bring the supply side together with the demand side. And then, of course, we have our unique value addition. And because we are the World Intellectual Property Organization, a lot of our unique value addition comes from harnessing the power of intellectual property and innovation to address the challenges of climate change. We also, as WIPO, we have, as you will have seen earlier, a tremendously rich data set of basically innovation that is happening all around the world. And that's perhaps one of our most meaningful contributions are these data sets and insights and market insights around the green technology space. We also have our eye on the SDG ball. We have the unique potential to go to scale, given that we are a global intergovernmental organization with global convening power. And then some of you might not know that WIPO is one of the UN entities that works most closely with the private sector, including multinational corporations and small and medium-sized enterprises. We're also working with financial institutions, non-governmental organizations, governments, and our fellow UN agencies. So we're pretty much able to tick all of those stakeholder boxes. Now, what does the WIPO Green network look like? How robust are we? Well, we know that we have over 10,000 visitors every month to our website and to our database. These numbers are a bit old. We're now heading towards 7,500 subscribers to our newsletter, our monthly newsletter, which is incredibly rich, I have to say, and features not only green technology innovators, but also green technology competitions. So if anyone is interested in applying for more support for their green innovation, we're often sharing information about that. And then we do quite a bit of work promoting green technology innovation through WIPO's social media channels. And on the right, we have an example of one of our large multinational corporation partners. I have to say we've got very robust involvement from the multinational corporation sector, which is extremely encouraging. We have partners like IBM and GE and Hitachi and Samsung and Fujitsu, a lot of very well-known names. And so specifically with Hitachi, we collaborate with them to help them actually implement their IP for society concept, which is all about the achievement of a sustainable society through the use and sharing of IP. Now, my last few slides, and I'm on slide 19 now, provide some insight into who is involved in WIPO Green. So as you can see from the different colors on the pie here, we've actually got a very healthy slice of life from just about every sector. So we've got the think tanks and universities and research institutions involved. We have other green technology platforms that we work with. We have business associations, and this includes trade groups, but also chambers of commerce, which if anyone has ever worked with a chamber of commerce, you know what a powerful inroad that can be to the business community in a country. We have 7% of our partners coming from governments and regional governmental organizations. We have multinational companies making up about 14% of WIPO Green partners. We have other IGOs, which would be other UN entities, making up about 8%. We have foundations and financial institutions coming in at about 6%, and then we have NGOs also coming in at about 6%. So, and then SMEs, actually the smallest piece of the pie at 3%, but WIPO has a special focus on increasing its support to SMEs, so we believe that that portion will soon grow. So as you can see, we are a very well-balanced partnership. Now we're a little less well-balanced if you look at where our partners are coming from region by region. As you can see, Asia is in the lead. So if you combine the pieces of the pie that are Southeast Asia, East Asia, Oceania, and Central and Southern Asia, and then we also have Western Asia combined with Northern Africa, you can see that by and large, it's Asia that's really out there in front, which is fantastic. We then have Europe at 34%, which is a heavy contender, followed by North America at 13%. And then we start to tail off as we look at Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm on slide 21 now, last few slides. The WIPO Green database, which I would encourage you all to visit, the address is at the bottom of the screen, features technologies in 7 main categories. And as you'll see in each of these 7 categories, you see yellow bars underneath. And that's to show you the percentage of the database that is taken up by technologies in this specific category. So as you can see, energy, renewable energy, green energy is leading. And about 40% of the technologies featured on the database are in the green energy sector. And that is followed closely by pollution and waste, where we see about 25% of the technologies in that area. And then products, materials, and processes. This would be green technology materials, products and processes. And then we kind of we tail off farming and forestry, water, transportation, and building and construction. So if you were to go to the database, what kind of results, and if you were to type in a search for, say, example, circular economy, what kind of results would this return? Well, you would get results for technologies on automated food waste prevention and tracking technology for food service. You could get results for safe sanitary napkin disposal and recycling units. And you could get results for photovoltaic materials for bioremediation. And I hope nobody asks me a question on that. So that's just an insight to some of the technologies that you will find on the database. And we have more than 3,000. We also have needs. So on the same database as we have the green technologies themselves, we've attempted to capture some of the demand for those green technologies, the goal being to automatically match those technologies with those needs. And we're in the process of actually rebuilding the entire database to turn it from a green technology database into really a green technology business information environment, a green business intelligence platform, if you will, that will include automatic matchmaking whenever a new technology or a new need is uploaded, but also it will provide insights to those who have uploaded their technologies or uploaded their needs. It will provide insights kind of like a LinkedIn of green technology as to who's looking at your technology and who's looking at your need. So you might be asking yourself, and this is my final slide, what are the examples of successful matchmaking that WIPO Green has done? So we have two examples here. Both are in Nigeria and Kenya. And this is when a company called Kubo and Sustek were able to match with needs in Nigeria and Kenya for clean water provided using environmentally sensitive ways to not only clean the water and to pump the water, but to provide the electricity that would help the system to run. So that was my final slide. I'd like to say a very big thank you. All questions are encouraged. Please go visit WIPO Green. You can just type the name WIPO Green into any browser and you will find our web pages. And you will also find on one of the tabs, it will say database, and I encourage you to have a look. As I said, the whole thing is being rebuilt. So the database that you would be able to access today is the existing one. And the new one, which will, I think, be much more like a race car, will be available this summer. So I encourage you to stay in touch. Okay, that's all I have. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Amy. I mean, it has been a very informative, engaging, and enjoyable presentation. I'm taking notes along the way because I feel like I learned so much from this process. We will be waiting for questions from the audience, but meanwhile, while we're waiting, I have a lot of questions. And the first one being the fact that on the slide that you show, the green tech innovation seemingly dominated by the US and China, two countries that we know to have the highest carbon emissions annually. I'm wondering, is there a way or innovation that we could think about on how to spread this more equally around the globe? How could we encourage more innovation in this sense beyond these two countries?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think a lot of it has to do with supporting SMEs in the countries, but also making sure that the intellectual property system in the other countries is robust and that innovators trust it and actually use it as they innovate. So, you know, as you rightly pointed out, the US and China are two of the countries in the globe that have the highest emissions, but they also have some of the most well-developed intellectual property systems. And the slide that I showed, what it really represents is use of the intellectual property system to capture innovation and to diffuse innovation. So it's a bit like a chicken and an egg. It's a bit like what gets measured gets done. I'm sure you've heard of that. And you will also have seen that countries in Europe were also a fairly dark green, as was Australia. And Australia is another high emitter, but it's also another country with a very strong and robust intellectual property system. So, you know, it is, and I don't want that slide to make it appear like there's not innovation happening in those countries, in those other countries, because there absolutely is. We know that there is. We know that some of the greatest innovators in the world live in very low resource settings because that low resource setting necessitates tremendous amounts of innovation. But what the global IP system doesn't usually capture, and what you will have seen on that slide, is kind of much more high-tech innovation. Because low-tech innovation, we don't see a lot of use specifically of the patent system for lower tech innovation. So what that slide would be blind to is lower tech innovation for which the innovators have not applied for international filings. So we wouldn't say international patents because there's no such thing as an international patent, but there is such a thing as an international filing. So the answer to your question is that your question is much more complex than you think it is. But I think, a really good first step to supporting high-tech innovators in the green technology space in some countries that weren't necessarily so dark green on the map is by really strengthening the IP system, because that is what's going to help the innovators protect their higher tech innovations.
Okay, I mean, that's something that a lot more of us could learn, and probably an information that policymaker could begin to comprehend and internalize better as they write the rules around intellectual property in the country. An additional question would be, how can the sustainable technologies replace old production model that are not environmentally friendly? Because I see you mentioned about circular economy, and you mentioned how the innovation begets innovation, and essentially the low carbon innovation have higher social rate of returns. So how could the sustainable technologies replace the old production models, in your opinion?
So that's a great question. In my opinion, there's two parts to this, and I'm going to go back to the classic economic split of supply and demand, and carrots and sticks for making both of those areas work better. So on the demand side, I think we need to see citizens demanding much more of their governments and saying, we want a faster transition to green technologies. This is important to us. We want better air quality. We want better water quality. So there has to be that groundswell of demand from the population. And then I think governments need to do a thorough job of responding to that demand by shaping the policy environment with not only regulations, which are usually seen more as sticks. So for example, regulations that say, okay, no business can emit more than X part per million gases into the environment. So things like that. So, regulation that would clamp down on polluters. But then they can also offer carrots in the policy space in the form of subsidies to green technology industries. They can loans. They can make the space much more comfortable for corporations and small businesses that are actually developing these solutions. They can make it easier for them to bring these solutions to market, and then they can kind of help to shape the market conditions such that it's more conducive to these new technologies. So that's the demand side. When we look at the supply side, it's important to support your innovators. It's important, and one of the most powerful ways of doing that, as I said, is having a functional IP system in which there's trust, in which the innovators place their trust, in which they're able to apply for the patents, but in which they're also able to trademark their brand, and et cetera, et cetera. So I would say, and then of course there's the role of organizations like WIPO to really facilitate this whole thing, to make it easier for governments to identify green technologies that they would like to bring to their country, or that they would like to innovate from the ground up in their country. And that's where a platform like WIPO Green comes into play. And lately we've been hearing the term technology scouting thrown around. And what that means is it refers mostly to governments who are actually looking for green technologies, who are trying to understand what's out there and what can I deploy in my country that will help me to meet, you know, the goals that I signed up for when I signed the Paris Climate Accord, for example.
Thank you. I mean, you, in one question, to answer the question that I still have in my head, but you already come up with the answer on the role of WIPO to encourage more use of sustainable technology. I'm gonna go to our next and probably our last questions is, what are the WIPO Green targets for the future? How do you see this moving forward?
So, I mean, as I said, our number one goal is just to speed the transition to a greener economy. That is our number one target. If we can see that that is happening, then we will have kind of met our goals. Now, us personally, what would we like to see? Well, as I said, we've got over 3,000 technologies listed on our database, and we have about 250 needs. So personally, I would like to see us do a better job of understanding how to collect the needs, which is basically demand. How can we do a better job as WIPO of understanding the demand for green technology and capturing that and expressing it in a way on our database that we can easily match it with the technologies that exist, the green technologies that exist, and the green technologies that are being developed. Because on our database, we have some technologies that are rollout ready. You know, they are ready to be installed, they're ready to be transferred, and it's indicated, actually. The stage of development of each technology is indicated in the listing on our website. So we have some that are ready to roll, but we have others that are in mid stages of R&D. And in some cases, the reason that their developers have listed them on our website is because they're looking for partners to help take them to the final phases of development. So what I would personally hope for WIPO Green is that we find a way to refine our algorithms to the point that they are able to say to that innovator who might be in the mid-stage R&D of developing a new geothermal energy creation device, hey, look, someone has just come to the database and said that they're looking for this and that they're willing to look at a technology that's still in a stage of development. Here you go. Meet each other, work together. That would be my ultimate goal, that we are able to do that on such a scale that we're actually moving the needle, that WIPO Green is actually helping the government of, I won't name a specific country because I'll get in trouble for it, but the government of a country to say, you know what, we really want to shift to a greener energy source. WIPO Green help us find it. And we're able to do that. That would be my dream for WIPO Green.
That sounds awesome. I mean, to me, it sounded like WIPO Green could become the next matchmaking platform for both users and those innovators and those who seek to expand on their sustainable green technology. Thank you so much, Emmy. This has been, as I said, a very informative and engaging session, and I learned a lot through this process. I think one of the sentence that you say that left a strong impression on me is really that you can't address global health issue without addressing climate change and food security, and how all that linked to green innovation and intellectual property right. And I would like really thank you for sharing with us all on this.
Thank you, Faweza. It's been a real pleasure. And I'd like to thank all of the participants and the attendees, even though I can't see you. Thank you for listening, and don't hesitate to get in touch.
Bye, thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Have a great day.